President Tusk, this is one of your last acts as the president of the EU. And Mr. Trudeau, you're also heading into an election where you're facing a tide of sentiment that differs from your policies. So I just wanted to know from both of you, how much of today is about putting safeguards in place against possible populist governments that may be following both of you?
Frankly speaking, I feel quite safe in Europe. My successor is a very responsible, pro-European, pro-Western politician. The new president of the Commission is the best possible example of our way of thinking, and this is why I have no problem with the future of the EU. Of course, we have problems in some member states, no doubt. But our last European Parliament elections showed that we are still able to fight effectively against extremism, political radicalism, and populism. I'm not here to comment Canadian context, but this is more for Justin, I think.
I think as we approach this Canadian election, I think we have to reflect on the various forces at play around the world, but not suddenly think that this election will be terribly different from elections in the past. We have seen elections in the past focused on personal attacks before. We have seen elections in the past focused on the politics of division, of fear, of envy, of anger before. And Canadians, when given the opportunity to respond to the better angels of their nature, to respond thoughtfully in ways that allay the fears that we are facing as individuals, as communities, rather than amplify and exacerbate those fears, we've made positive choices that have led to better outcomes for Canadians and better outcomes for the world. And that focus is, again, going to be at play in this upcoming election. But ultimately, when we talk about how we safeguard the values and principles that have served our democracies well, the only ultimate safeguard is citizens themselves, citizens who are informed and thoughtful, ambitious and positive, and understanding that regardless of the challenges we face, we will always be able to overcome them if we lean on each other and work together. And that continues to be my focus, and it's certainly the example we see in this partnership with Europe. But it's something we continue to need to remain vigilant and attentive on. But if every step of the way we expect Canadians and electors in general to be at their best, they will rarely let themselves down.
President Tusk, you were mentioning that it's happening in some of the member states, and I acknowledge that. So, given that it's clear that these populist movements are taking hold in some of the member states and even in North America, and that's why I'd like Prime Minister Trudeau also weigh in on this, to what extent do you think that's a rejection of what multilateral partnerships have accomplished or stood for since the Cold War?
And I'm not here to provoke a long and a little bit maybe abstractive and theoretical discussion about multilateralism and globalization. I have no doubt that populism is nothing new in Europe and also in America. It's as old as humankind is old. It's for me, it's rather a matter of my self-obligation to fight against the most dangerous and most radical version of these political movements. It's our challenge, it's our task, not a matter of academic discussions. And I think that after the European elections, I can say that Europe showed that we are quite resilient, and because in fact the result is much more optimistic than we expected 1 or 2 years ago. More or less the situation, the political situation in Europe is under control.
I think we have to recognize that the pace of change around the world, with technology, with global supply chains, with new innovations, with migrations, has been challenging and a source of anxiety for many citizens. We need to recognize that even though we've seen tremendous growth over the past years in our economies, over the past decades in our economies, that growth has been unevenly shared. And these result in concerns and anxieties that people have around their own futures, around their kids' futures, around their community's future. And politicians and political leaders face a choice that is indeed as old as politics itself. A choice to amplify those fears and reflect back those anxieties to citizens as a way of getting short-term support without actually solving any of the challenges we're facing. Or a choice of rolling up our sleeves, working together, and trying to do the difficult work of overcoming these challenges, of allaying these fears. That is exactly what we are focused on. And there are new technologies that amplify some of the populist tools and voices. But ultimately, I think we've seen time and time again that if we trust citizens to be thoughtful, to be positive, to feel empowered by our institutions, our processes, we will always be able to do better, to solve these challenges, and to succeed. And that certainly is the counter to the kind of insularity and hunkering down in populism that so many people have been trying to peddle on the world stage.